Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part thereof for the 23rd of February 2024. Just to let you know, I have done a breaking news update on my other channel. I had to put it on my other channel. It's about a Patriot system, launcher command and control unit that supposedly the Russians claimed that they've destroyed it or them, and I don't think they have. Anyway, that's what that video is about. Just to point you towards an article I've just released. It is here. So on Only Sky, it is a slightly different article than I have written previously concerning what I normally do on Only Sky. So Crosshairs, a Christian fighter in Ukraine, and the question of God in war. So I sat down with a soldier and talked about how he justifies being a soldier and fighting and killing people in light of his belief system. And hopefully that was written with respect as a liberal atheist that I am. Not really like critiquing what he's saying and making it some big philosophical attack or debate, but just letting him express himself and then looking for the commonalities between us rather than the differences. So I'll be interested to see what you think about that article. And the last thing before I start is, RIP my local pub that I'm sure the FSB burnt down 2 nights ago. Gutted. So I'm wearing a t-shirt that I got for my 21st birthday from my mate because we always used to go to the pub. So and it's got the model of the Queen Mary that burnt down with it. A massive model of this ship in the pub. Anyway, hope it wasn't an insurance job. They burnt down 2 pubs in my local area 20 years ago for insurance jobs to build flats and houses on. So hope it wasn't that. It's too precious for that. This one, right? Let's go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. Another day of heavy losses, 1,000 personnel lost, slightly less than we've seen in the last few days, but still significant. I guess that's going to be as a result of Avdiivka calming down, the lines being drawn in like a shorter area. It's no longer the cauldron, so you've got a shorter front line, and it's mainly around Lestochkirna in the middle there. So it's not an all-on battle going on now. The Russians will probably be doing a lot of clearing out, setting themselves up, making sure they know what's going on in Avdiivka, and as a result you'll see a slight dip in the lost numbers there, but they are still attacking in a number of places. It's pretty tough for both sides along the entire front line, and of course the Ukrainians are going to be losing a lot of troops as well in these activities, as I keep having to remind you. At 3 tanks, obviously not as much as we have seen previously. That's a very low number, all things considered. But then 37 armored personnel vehicles is a high number. 49 artillery systems is, a phenomenal statistic there. I saw a video yesterday. It's quite an interesting one, worth looking at if you can find it, of a guy that was recording his it's probably like a D30 howitzer or something, just out slightly in the distance. He is sat back from, I presume it was the team that would normally operate the howitzer back where they'd probably be camping or whatever. And he's filming a drone come in and take it out, and like catch the whole thing on camera. His mates are like, "Oh, can you send that to me?" It just makes you realise how social media this whole war is. As I present it to you through social media. Here's a guy recording his howitzer getting hit by a drone, and they're all quite excited about it. He's like, "F yeah," like looking at it, and then they're shooting, I presume just a little while later, trying to shoot down another drone. It's too far away, and then that hits the howitzer again, so it gets 2 hits on it. Just goes to show how prevalent drones are at the moment, although there are some analyses coming out at the moment saying drones are being useful. They have their place in kind of attempting to replace artillery ammunition, but they can't do it. There's a reason your infantry call in artillery and not FPV drones. There's that barrage effect of 20, 30, 40 artillery shells raining down on the enemy in a way that FPV drones can't really do until you start being able to swarm, but they don't get the velocity, they don't get the explosive, I think, the kinetic power of artillery shells. So yeah, just thought I'd sidebar that. So 49 artillery systems is a high number. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems is pretty decent numbers in those categories. 36 vehicles and fuel tanks and 9 pieces of special equipment, fairly high numbers there. So again, another big day of Russian losses. Really considerable losses over the last few weeks. Well, really since October started and the attack on Avdiivka. But again, Ukrainian losses are going to be high. And I guess Andrew Perpetua's stats today kind of show that. We have a parity of stats, maybe one or two. No, it's pretty much 50-50. And I explained yesterday that really the Ukrainians are going to want at least 3-1, but preferably sort of 5-1 plus in terms of the ratio. So when it's parity, that's a bad day for the Ukrainians. Now, I don't know whether this is activity from yesterday or whether there's been a dump of footage that might be stretching over a week or so. And that could be shoving up the Ukrainian losses on one particular day. There are 2 decoys there, so we need to take that off. Interestingly, a Leopard 2A6 decoy taken out by a first-person view drone. I was listening as well to an analysis. I think it was Ukraine the latest, actually. They were talking about how obviously artillery ammunition is frantically low. They're talking to an artillery crews near Avdiivka, I think. They just don't have anything to fire in the main. But also that night vision FPV drones are an issue for Ukrainians. So the Russians have an advantage still in night vision drones. Even though we do see Ukrainians use them, it seems to be that Russia appears to have more of those particular types of drones. Right, looking at the Ukrainian losses as an engineering vehicle, many Russians claim this was the first Abrams to be taken out. It's not. It's based on an Abrams chassis, but it's not an Abrams. It's an engineering vehicle, M1150. I think I've got a picture of that in a minute. M109 artillery. Other than that, we got a few tanks, kind of unknown, some infantry fighting vehicles, mainly BMP-1s. We've got a Humvee ambulance, and then 3 M113s. They've got dozens of new M11, well, they're not new, but new to the Ukrainians, M113s delivered at the moment. And these are vehicles that fairly consistently come over because they are old vehicles that countries have a lot of. And when places like Spain, Portugal, particularly want to be seen, I guess, or want to help, but they don't have too much equipment, then it's the M113s that I think are the easy pickings for, we can give them some of those because, they need replacing anyway. MRAP truck, civilian vehicles. So, we have, I guess, quite a lot of stuff that adds its own value, but nothing too crazy valuable in there. For the Russians, a couple of drones, I wouldn't really have included them. 2 crash drones, so you can take them out. But the Tor M1 air defense system and the Strela 10 are fairly high value. Tor M1, they're not going to like losing them. Taken out with the Gimlers and precision guided munition. There's footage of that available. Muron M, we've got a Russian boat, artillery, a couple of Ta-80 tanks, a lot of infantry fighting vehicles, as you'd expect with the way that they are conducting their assaults on actually Avdiivka, obviously, but also Bakhmut. There's that column, which I'll refer to again today, that was taken out yesterday, or actually probably the day before now. A couple of APCs, some trucks and civilian vehicles. So I would say the Russians have lost a higher value bunch of kit, given that you got the Tor M1 and the Strela there. Other than that, it's much of a muchness. And then moving on here. So I showed you or referenced that footage of several troop accumulations. I think it was either some kind of training thing or whatever near Krinky in the Aleshki Sands that HIMARS had a go at. So I think there were 3 HIMARS missiles a hit. Anyway, that included a high-ranking deputy commander of the 328th VDV, so that's Airborne Division, so that's elite troops, died in Kherson yesterday following the rain of tungsten released by 3 HIMARS, as mentioned there. So as this source says, regiment losses 36 200s, so those are 36 dead, 28 300s, so 28 injured. So this has come from the Russians. You could argue that will be your baseline minimum, that if the Russians are saying 36 dead, it's likely to be more, or 36 dead. This is honest. Also, sources report the death of Deputy Commander of the 328th Airborne Infantry Regiment, Denis Kolcharov, there. So, yeah, data on losses in other divisions is being clarified. So this could just be the 328th, because apparently the 810th was there as well, the Naval Infantry Brigade. So this could just be, well, it does say, according to media reports, Airborne and Marine Corps. So who knows whether that is an accurate indication of the losses. Now, talking about that Bakhmut column, field reports indicate that Russian forces launched an armoured assault on the west of Bakhmut, but fell into a Ukrainian ambush. In the attempt, they fielded 15 units of armoured equipment, half of which were destroyed. I present you with 3 images of destroyed Russian BMP-3s, and here they are. So it gives you an idea of what was going on there, and then that would feed into probably these stats. The BMP-3s there, unknown cause, they're just on fire. I assume that's that. I haven't checked his sources, but he does list all the sources on his Google Docs document. Then this is a footage of the Russian Tor and Estrela 10 air defense systems being destroyed near Krinky or in the Kherson area. So precision guided munition and Gimlers, I think, being used to destroy them. Now, this was an interview with a Ukrainian HIMARS crew. It's in Ukrainian. I did try and go through looking at the auto-translated captions and auto-generated captions to see whether this was recent or not, and I couldn't quite work it out. Anyway, it's interesting because this is a HIMARS crew talking about their activities. According to the crew, they destroyed a Russian S-400 battalion with M39 ATACMS in response to it firing on Kramatorsk. That's interesting because we know that ATACMS were used in Luhansk Air Base. I think only 2 of them. We know that a number of them, at least 3 of them, were used, but I think more were used on the Berdyansk Air Base. And then there was somewhere in Crimea, I think ATACMS were used. I think it might have been an S-300 system. And then here an S-400 system used near, so that would be near Kramatorsk. And one assumes they destroyed that S-400. So, yeah, interesting interview there. Russian forces claimed themselves to have knocked out first M1's Abrams tank. As mentioned, that's incorrect. It's an M1150 assault breacher vehicle, which is based on the same chassis. So they have destroyed that, and I presume that's near Avdiivka, but I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, who knows? And then I've already gone through the video looking at the Patriot battery. So I think that this was a large warehouse complex. It was very heavily damaged and largely destroyed. That's going to be a sore loss because there was no doubt military equipment in there or in the buildings. We do see evidence of one green unit or truck or something under some of the debris, but it actually didn't look too badly damaged. But when you've got falling roof on you, it's going to be taking some damage. I don't know how much equipment's taken out, but I'm almost certain. Again, it's all about probability analysis. Almost certain that it wasn't a Patriot launcher that was hit. There's no evidence a Patriot launcher was hit there, and no evidence the command and control center was hit either. So I think the Russians are talking that one up. What happens is you see this vehicle drive off, and then it cuts to warehouses blowing up, and the vehicle doesn't have enough wheels to be a Patriot launcher, and it looks more like this truck. So I've gone through that in the video that's on my other channel. Go and check that out. So resistance fighters in occupied Berdyansk have struck another blow against the Russians. Occupiers originally said the accident happened with flames at a gas station, but photos show no damage to the filling station. It looks like a grey pickup was targeted. Don't know whether the person was injured or killed in that, but this is happening not infrequently behind Russian lines. So yeah, and then we're moving on to Ukraine shines a light on North Korea again. Security chiefs have now confirmed Russia has fired. Actually, that should be in. No, I'm going to leave that. I'll leave that. It's going to be in my strikes one. So I don't know what's gone on here. This could be in a strikes category, but there is a big fire, or was a big fire, at an oil field in Tomsk. Flames rose 10 meters. Officials say something went wrong with a mixture of gas, oil, water at the Tomsk Neft VNK field in the Alexandrovsky district. No injuries were reported. It could be a case of the Ukrainians hitting that. Who knows? Right, moving on to distance strikes. We had overnight Russia attacking Ukraine with numerous Shahed drones. Out of 31 drones, 23 were shot down. That leaves 8 not shot down, which is a pretty high number of drones to do some damage inside Ukraine. In addition, 3 S-300 missiles, 1 KH-31P anti-radar missile, and 2 KH-22 missiles were launched. None of those were shot down. So that's quite a bit of damage possibly done last night. The problem is we know very little about what damage is done because there's quite a tight operational security net over footage coming out and information coming out about that. So I would assume that the Ukrainians probably took a bit of a bloody nose last night around Ukraine in certain places. It's always interesting when you hear that anti-radar missiles was sent. What does that mean? Have they lost the radar system? Have they lost something like a Patriot radar or something like that? Who knows? We just don't know. Russia has today hit another thermal plant. This came out yesterday. So DTEK, which is a power company, says 6 workers have been injured at the thermal power station. Although it's not stated, is likely to be in a free part of Donetsk, and with serious damage going to badly affect civilians again. This is something that the Russians did last year, and they do still do now and again hit energy infrastructure. Right, there are injuries in Odessa after drone strikes in the southern city. The local authorities saying a fire broke out at a civil infrastructure facility. Local channel, seen as pro-Russian by many, claims a hotel in the city was hit. And then actually today, turns out that 3 people died in a missile and drone attack on the port city of Odessa. Business on the coast was hit, causing a big fire. That's a real shame. There's quite a bit of imagery coming out of that at the moment, and also imagery, as just seen there, of Dnipro that was also hit. 8 people injured. Rescuers fear more may be still trapped under rubble. 5 drones were fired. They were shot down, but a high-rise building and a business were both hit, according to local leaders. So, yeah, that is Dnipro city and Dnipropetrovsk being hit by overnight drones. Right, Kherson has also just been hammered over the last 24 hours. Like I've said, it's been hammered a lot recently. It seems like there's been an uptick in attention on Kherson. Shahed killer drones are flying also towards Poltava last night. Zaporizhia was hit by ballistic missiles. I think that might be where the ballistic missiles, those S-300s, went. Because there are S-300 launchers down in that southern Zaporizhia region, occupied region, that they often use them to not only defend against aerial threats from the Ukrainians, but use them to lob into places like Zaporizhia and Dnipro on a regular basis. Now, the Russians again have dropped another bomb on themselves in their own territory. Russians dropped a heavy aircraft bomb on Russian territory for the 8th time since the beginning of the year. So it's 8 times this year. They've done this an awful lot. So when I get criticised for saying, why do you suppose that the Russians have hit their own village or town here with their own bombs? As I sometimes say, is a plausible cause for that, because the Ukrainians don't have a lot of weaponry, really. They're not going to be sending missiles into civilian areas of Russian cities. They are going to be targeting very useful strategic targets. Now, it's either air defense that's taking that down, which is what happens in Ukraine, or the Russians have been known and they've admitted their own missiles landing in their own places as well. Well, here's another example. Another FAB-250 high-explosive aerial bomb dropped by a Russian bomber has been found in the Belgorod region, sources of the Astra Telegram channel report. According to them, the bomb was found on the 18th, the village of Soloti. The authorities evacuated about 150 local residents and eliminated the bomb at the landfill. The information was indirectly confirmed by the governor of Belgorod region. Quote, in the Valyuski urban district in the village of Soloti, an explosive object was found and destroyed by an engineering group of the Russian military of defense. There were no consequences, he wrote. Did not specify how the bomb ended up there. Russian warplanes dropped FAB 250 on the territory of the country on their way to Ukraine for the 8th time since the beginning of the war. Before that, 2 bombs of this type fell in Belgorod region in January. One of them was found on a farm in Postnikov of Korochansky district. The second in a village of Streletskoye of Belgorod district. No one was injured, but in the latter case, the authorities also had to evacuate about 150 residents. That was I think that village where it was some really quite widespread destruction caused by them dropping a bomb on their own civilian infrastructure. Right, this is what I was talking about earlier. Ukraine shines a light on North Korea again. Security chiefs have now confirmed Russia has fired around 20 Hwasong 11 or KN-23-24 ballistic missiles. These warheads killed 24 civilians and injured over 100 more. What is the UN doing about this? What is South Korea doing about this? What can South Korea do? Well, it'd be nice if they really helped with provision of weapons through to Ukraine in some way, since they have a huge and continue expanding military-industrial complex. Right, explosions are heard above Donetsk in the last 24 hours, so that has been targeted by the Ukrainians, as well as a massive fire at Novosibirsk. Big blaze in a warehouse said to contain pallets, food, and metal products. I don't know if that's a Russia on fire or if that's a targeted fire on some military-industrial facility. Who knows? Right, now moving on to other bits and pieces. Okay, in Avdiivka, as the Russians advanced, civilians fled the Russian occupation. So these are the last remaining civilians, told their stories of Russian atrocities and other war crimes, summary executions and torture in the Russian world, in the Ruski Mir. Russian-affiliated media refrain from showing you this. So yeah, there are, as we've heard in so many other contexts, examples of Russian war crimes aplenty. I mean, I've seen 10 videos, I guess, in the last few days of Russian war crimes in Avdiivka alone, of Russians executing soldiers. I've spoken to people firsthand in Ukraine where they've recounted war crimes to me on civilians. And it's a shame. I was speaking to a mate the other night who, one of the dads, my boys' rugby team took him to training, spoke to a dad. And he's a former UK military man. Actually, he'd served. He's not my tank commander, mate, but he'd served out in Iraq. And he's like pro-Ukraine, but he was like, yeah, but what about some of the war crimes that Ukrainians are doing? I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I wonder what you're talking about. And he promptly went on to, I think he was referring to, because details, and it's now some weeks back and trying to get details out of him, but I think it was the mortar attack on Donetsk city that I debunked some weeks back in a separate video. So I was talking to him about how that wasn't possibly the Ukrainians. I talked about how there's a couple of videos of Ukrainians supposedly shooting POWs, but actually when you analyze the videos, they were perfidy accounts where Russians had run out with guns after the POWs were lined up to shoot the Russians and to shoot the Ukrainians. And so that wasn't a war crime. And just explaining that, yeah, it would be incredibly unusual if during 2 years of war, the Ukrainians haven't committed war crimes, right? I'm sure they're human beings. And especially when you hear, I interviewed in that article I've talked about, I interviewed this guy to say, what's your justification for war and in light of the Bible, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things he started out with was, when you hear and when you see when you speak to people who are giving you details of children being raped by Russian soldiers, and that has been well documented. And he says, and you look at children, pictures of your own children and your beautiful family, and think that could be my family. Then obviously that justifies him going to war and defending his country. But you can imagine in certain contexts that would be enough to justify Ukrainians doing things in revenge back to Russia. So people, everyone's human here to different degrees in this war, right? So Ukrainians will be committing, I'm sure, somewhere, some war crimes, right? It's about the mass of war crimes that the Russians have committed and the institutional approach to them. These come down often from on high. These are part of almost their doctrinal approach to war, which is not the case with what will, if they are happening, will be isolated individual human cases of people taking out on Russians. With the Russians, the number is just vastly more. So 160,000 odd, or probably more than that, registered war crimes being investigated. Yeah, you've got things being torture chambers being put up all around the occupied territories. These are things that are part of the whole structure of the Russian war machine, and so it's just a whole different kettle of fish. Anyway, yeah, more evidence of war crimes coming out there. Ukrainian infantrymen deployed at Zenit strongpoint southeast of Avdiivka. That's that nuclear bunker part of the airfield complex to the north of the airfield that the Ukrainians held onto for as long as they could, and then it got surrounded, and that's basically the only way it's ever going to get taken over. Well, those Ukrainian soldiers saying that they had to flee under heavy Russian fire on foot, and they were walking for hours through a path where many were killed and wounded, and those killed and wounded comrades were there, and they couldn't do anything about it. Had to get out of Dodge, and there was no medevac because I presume it was all chaotic and it all happened so quickly, and there was no thought put into an operational withdrawal of Avdiivka at an earlier point. I think they weren't planning on losing it, and then suddenly it all went. And it was there are some terrible stories that I'm sure are going to come out of the Avdiivka experience, whereby Russian troops are going to have done some pretty horrible things, but they've also going to have taken over large areas fairly quickly, and Ukrainian troops will have had some pretty terrible experiences there. And they are starting to come out at the moment, and yeah, it is a shame, and people will blame Commander Sersky, for example, the Commander Sersky, but this is, I think, Avdiivka. The issues of Avdiivka were a long time in the making, and he had been only in charge for a week or so. Could well be the fall guy for Avdiivka, but I don't think Zaluzhny gets off the hook. I don't think other regional commanders get off the hook, because there needed to be greater fortifications built. There needed to be better contingency plans, I think, put in place for the loss of Avdiivka. Anyway, this I find interesting and important. Sirsky is now conducting an audit of the Ukrainian armed forces and has already found thousands of soldiers who have never been to the front. I bet that, because there are a lot of soldiers in the Ukrainian armed forces, although they need mobilization, there's a lot of people working at the borders, behind checkpoints. There are so many checkpoints, right? I've been through a whole ton of them. All of these sort of places are manned with soldiers, right, going right back into the interior of Ukraine. And quote, he said that it's already been found that thousands of soldiers who have never been to the front, quote, are already receiving orders and are preparing to replace or strengthen individual units on the front line. I think there's probably an awful lot of people who are doing stuff behind here who don't necessarily need to be doing that, and could be brought to the front to, as it says, to strengthen those, or to rotate them. So you could, thank you very much, Ivan. So you could not only strengthen those units, but you could just rotate them with people who are working those border checkpoints. It's quite a cushy job if you've had 6 months working a checkpoint, as opposed to 6 months in a trench in Novomykhailivka area. So this doesn't surprise me at all. And I think it's probably a good thing that Sersky is doing stuff like that, most certainly. Right, moving on to Alexei Navalny's mother. They say that if I don't agree to a secret funeral, they will do something with my son's body. So the mother is threatened by Russian security services. So she's said that she was shown the body of her son in prison, but they refused to give it back, said the mother. Quote, they secretly took me to the morgue where they showed Alexei. The investigators claim they know the cause of death. They have already medical and legal documents that I saw, and the medical certificate of death I signed. According to the law, they should give me his body immediately, but they haven't done until now. Instead, they are blackmailing me, putting conditions on me where where, when, and how Alexei should be buried. It's illegal. They want it done secretly without a farewell. They want to bring me to the outskirts of the cemetery to a fresh grave and say, this is where your son lies. I do not agree to this. This will be partly to do with trying to cover up how he died and disinform people about that. But it's also going to be about, if there's any kind of public funeral, that's a focal point for people to protest or to show, by implication, dissent of Putin's regime. And that is not what the FSB and not what the Kremlin will want. So that is why they're going for this secret burial. According to the woman, the investigators threatened her to do something with her son's body if she does not agree to a secret burial. Quote, investigator Voropayev openly told me, time is not working for you, the corpse is decomposing. And then you throw into the mix something like this, because this is what freedom looks like in Russia. Yes, all you Russian trolls on my threads, this is what you advocate. These are special forces breaking down the door of a Russian citizen who wrote Putin killed Navalny on social media. I can write Rishi Sunak killed, I don't know, someone else that's died in the UK. I can write that on Facebook. Nothing will happen. Because, I'll tell you something, guys. Because the UK is a damn sight freer than Russia. But Russia are the ones that are going to liberate Ukraine, right? This is what liberation looks like. If people like Elon Musk or Tucker Carlson don't care ordinary Russians have no right to free speech, then they won't care when it is taken away from you. The only speech they want protected is their speech, which serves to empower the fascists of the world. So this is, someone's door being broken down by special forces because they had written something critical of Putin on social media. Absolutely terrible. Today's post from the MOD is a lesson on how to describe Russia as a fascist state without actually writing these words. And again, this feeds into what we've just been talking about. So, on February the 14th, 2024, Russian President, I always call him dictator, Vladimir Putin signed a bill into law that permits the confiscation of property for the offence of, quote, spreading false information about the Russian armed forces, an offence largely designed to silence domestic critics of its war in Ukraine. This is what freedom looks like in Russia. 2 days earlier, the State Duma's Committee on Foreign Interference introduced a bill seeking to expand the scope of Russia's undesirable organisations designation. This is likely aimed to further limit the operation of Russian-language Russian media organisations such as RFE, RL, Deutsche Welle, and BBC Russian Service, because this is what freedom looks like in Russia. And lastly, these moves are a part of a wider Russian government trend that attempts to restrict the domestic information environment to limit domestic criticism and dissent. While this trend has been seen in evidence for many years, it is substantially accelerated after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, because this is what freedom looks like in Russia. It's not free, it's a fascist state, and it's becoming increasingly more so. And anyone that thinks otherwise is either a complete tool or is so naive as to be rightfully labelled as stupid. Is my rhetoric divisive? Probably. I've just seen so much of this stuff now that it's beyond ridiculous for anyone to deny it. So, tell it like it is. And that's what I'm doing. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Would appreciate you reading the old Only Sky articles, see what you think. Toodle pips, and I'll speak to you soon.